3 minutes left to work on the 3/5 compromise. This was a review from last time. I'll be sharing my screen with the focus question for today's lesson. Two minutes left. Just don't worry, just because we had a COVID test. I was COVID testing, so the focus question you're about to copy down. I'll give everyone 1 more minute on the other assignments. And you can just go to this. Copy down what's on the screen. All right, at this point, you should be done with finishing up the 3/5 compromise. Worksheet, please just keep in mind, we spent a lot of time on the Great Compromise at the Constitutional Convention. We did the worksheet on it. We didn't spend as much time on the Great Compromise, so I want to spend a little time going over that. It's not as big of a Regents thing as the Great Compromise, but I think it's an important thing morale-wise because we have African Americans in our country not being treated as a full person in terms of representation, which is obviously extremely sad. The truth of the matter is, though, it actually is a step forward for African Americans, crazy as that sounds. And when I say African Americans, I mean African American slaves. Because if you were free African American, then you were treated as a full person. So I want to make that clear. But if you were a slave at that particular time, you went from being counted as 0 to at least 3/5. So it is a step forward, as crazy as that sounds. Not where it should be, but it is a step forward. And it was a huge reason why many African Americans in the South started getting representation. It would end up helping them later on in the country, but we'll talk about that more later. All right, now we need to set the situation, okay? Right now, it's 1787, it's the Constitutional Convention. After the Great Compromise, after the 3/5 compromise, we basically have a fully written constitution, okay? So before we go into some of the actual details of the Constitution, okay, we have to go over some definition or some vocab here and then some of the debates that happen in terms of ratifying the Constitution. So I'll give you a second here, but what are the major differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and how do they debate over ratifying the Constitution? Long focus question, but it will make sense soon. And then also please copy down the two definitions in orange here. I'll give you 30 seconds before I start talking so you can concentrate and do that. Okay, so let's start talking about some of these things here. So basically what you need to understand from the start is the way I do this is a little bit backwards. Before we actually go into the Constitution and the details of it and what's actually said in it, and we will spend, 5 or 6 lessons on it. It takes a long time to really go through it. I actually like to start at the end, which is what happens after the Constitution is written, because that's really where all the drama really takes place. We have two groups of people. We have what's called the Federalists and the Antifederalists. And these two groups of people basically want to establish and try and persuade people to say either the Constitution that we wrote is good, which are the Federalists, or the Anti-Federalists, which say it's not good, we need to fix some things up before we do this. All right, so we got to go over some terms first. So our country is going now to be what's called a sovereign independent country. So sovereignty means when you have supreme power or authority, okay? And then when you put the term sovereignty and you put the word popular in front of it, it's a term that we want to try and break down because this term popular sovereignty comes up a lot, okay? So let's really break down what this word means, okay? So it's the principle that authority or government comes from the consent of the governed. So previously in history, when you are a sovereign country like Great Britain, right, that means the government rules you. Okay. Whenever you see the word popular thrown in front of a term, though, in social studies, popular is not like a popularity contest. Popular is another word for people. So a big term you'll see when you get to the election, which we'll go over soon, the presidential election, and on November 3rd, is the term popular vote. Popular vote is the amount of votes by the people. All right. So popular sovereignty is the principle that government comes from the consent of the governed. Okay, so it comes from the people. So what that means is power belongs to the people in our country, and that's how our country has been established. Okay, and the way we kind of go about in showing how we are a country that wants popular sovereignty is by voting. Okay, if we aren't happy with the leader, if we're unhappy with the representative, we are going to vote. Now, the reason why we're going over this term now is we're going to use popular sovereignty to ratify the Constitution. So what does it mean to ratify, or what is ratification? It's the official way to confirm something, usually by a vote. So if you want a law passed, a law ratified, it needs to be confirmed with a vote. If you want the Constitution, in this case, ratified, it needs to be confirmed by a vote, okay? So we're using our popular sovereignty, our power in the people running the country, okay? I ask this question, okay, a lot. This is the first time I'm gonna ask you, and you write in the chat, okay, when you think you know the answer. Who is in control and who is the leader of our country? Who is in control of our country? Write in the chat if you know the answer. Who is in control of the country? The president, the commander-in-chief. You guys are all wrong. Who is in control of the United States? Chanel, perfect. You got it. Emmanuel, perfect. We are. Excellent. The people are in control of the country. So I'm going to ask you this question a lot. Who runs the country? It's the people. It's the consent of the governed. The president runs the executive branch. They are the leader of the executive branch. They are one branch of government. Now, the president is our biggest leader. There's no doubt about that. But that does not necessarily mean they run the country. Okay? It's a tricky question because we are going to elect our political leaders. Therefore, we actually run the country. Okay? So we're going to use our voting to ratify the Constitution. Okay? So the next slide you're not writing down, but just listen. Okay? But here's the Constitution. All right, it was finished written, and it was done being written on September 17, 1787. It obviously starts with the, we the people of the United States. We'll go into the preamble soon. So if you wanted to read the Constitution on September 17, 1787, it would be fully written and done. Okay? However, it did not officially become the law of our land until 1789. And really technically 1791, but we'll say 1789. So there's a span of 2 years where we have the Constitution, but we are actually not following it yet because it hasn't been fully ratified into our supreme law of the land. Okay? When the Constitution was first written, only 2 of the 13 states voted to ratify it, basically meaning that there were problems with the Constitution and they wanted to fix those problems first before we went forward and did this. Okay? So the Constitution needed to be ratified first, but only a few states had the votes to do it. Okay? So we now need to go into debates. And we need to go into a controversy where we need to say, okay, how do we fix the Constitution? All right? And what's going to happen is 2 groups are going to develop. Okay, you're going to have the Federalists on one side who are in favor of ratifying the Constitution, and you have the Anti-Federalists on the other side. And depending on what you believed in, you aligned yourself to what each side. They are not political parties like Republicans and Democrats, but they are similar. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. Okay, this slide you're going to need to copy down bullet points 1, 2, and I put 5, but I meant and the last one. All right, so you can make a little T-chart in your notebook. This will help you with your assignment. This will help you with all of your notes. I'm coming back to this. All right, so you're going to copy down the first bullet point for each side, the second bullet point for each side, and then you'll notice it's going to be the 5th one for the Anti-Federalists and the 6th one for the Federalists. Okay, so I'll give you another 30 seconds before I start talking so you can concentrate and do that. Set up a little T-chart. Yes, Moise, for both sides. 1, 2, and the last one for both sides. Okay, so picture you're in 1787 and 1788, and the hottest issue of the time was, should we ratify this Constitution? Because the big problem is the Articles of Confederation was ratified too quickly. And when it was ratified too quickly, we saw all the mistakes the Articles of Confederation had. All right, so let's break down the term federal again. Federal is another word for national or central. Okay, so the federal government, our main central government for our entire country. Okay, so we have what's called the Federalists. And what you got to understand about the Constitution is it's a happy medium between the Articles of Confederation, and the monarchy of King George III. Basically, the Articles of Confederation was way too weak. Okay, our state governments became more powerful than our federal government. The new Constitution is going to clearly make the federal government more powerful, but they want to make it a fine line between being too powerful. All right. So the Federalists favored the Constitution was written. They were good with it. They didn't really want to change much. So they kind of spoke out in belief of the Constitution. Okay. Anytime you're anti something, okay, if you're for abortion, okay, you are okay with abortion happening to babies or young fetuses in the womb. If you're anti-abortion, obviously you are against the position of abortion. So the anti-Federalists, you are against the Federalists. All right, they obviously opposed the Constitution. They thought there were some real problems with it, and they would not ratify the Constitution until some of those problems got fixed. All right. Number two, the Federalists wanted a strong national elected government. Okay, they thought the Articles of Confederation was way too weak. They needed a stronger federal national government. And what they're going to do is they're going to put a president in, and they're going to make branches of government with checks and balances and go from there. The anti-Federalists believed that we needed stronger local and state governments like in the Articles of Confederation. All right, so they were pretty much on the same page of the Articles of Confederation. So they didn't want that to change too much. Okay? And though you're not writing down 3 and 4, just the Federalists believed that a strong national government was needed to protect the nation. We saw Shays' Rebellion, right? Okay, if there's a domestic issue, if there's a rebellion, we need the federal government to step in and stop it. Okay? The anti-Federalists believe that, well, if you create a federal government that's too strong, then boom, we're going to get another King George III, another monarchy, and it's going to be that American Revolution was a waste. But the Federalists kept saying, like, we don't want King George III, but we need something a little bit stronger. Okay? It's like if you have like a really, really strict teacher, right? And you just can't stand them or her because they're just so strict and so annoying. And then if that teacher leaves, and then you come in with get a now very relaxed and lazy teacher, someone might be happy, but most people are like, you know what? Maybe we need something in between the two. Right? That's what America's doing. Okay, they're trying to find the happy medium between the two. But the biggest thing was that the Federalists preached this thing called checks and balances, which we'll talk about more. I know you probably remember from 7th grade, but essentially they kept preaching that there's no one way a president or a king could ever occur in our country because of checks and balances. All right. The Federalists, and this is the last major thing, the Federalists were happy with the way the Constitution was written, but the Anti-Federalists had one huge issue. And this was really what drove the wedge between the two sides. The Anti-Federalists said that there is nothing written down that protects your rights as a citizen. Now, the Federalists would say that it's inherent in the Constitution, that we talked about in the Declaration of Independence, how everyone should have their natural rights, inalienable rights, that all men are created equal, right? But the Anti-Federalists said the Constitution needs to make explicitly clear what rights everyone has. Okay? So the Anti-Federalists kept proposing this idea of what's called a Bill of Rights. And this Bill of Rights, if you remember from last year, goes through the rights that we have as citizens, right? Talks about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms, the right to a lawyer. That was not written down in the original Constitution. So that was the huge wedge that drove the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists apart. And you'll see Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay. They're going to argue that a Bill of Rights is not needed. But people like Thomas Jefferson, okay, they're going to argue that you definitely need to write down what the rights are expected. Otherwise, if there is no law, there's no right kind of put out there, the government's going to take advantage of that. So it's a good point by the Anti-Federalists. Okay, so what we're going to do is, we have one more slide before we get to the assignment. I want you to write in the chat right now. If you had a viewpoint, if you had a feeling, and you wanted to get your point across, okay, what is something you could do? You obviously want to provide evidence. You want to speak about it. Okay, maybe post it on the internet. But in 1787, what was the big major way you can maybe get your point across to a large group of people? What could you do? So write in the chat if you think you know what the answer is. Protest, Winderley, good thought, absolutely, but there's not much to protest here. They actually just want to put their viewpoint across. Newspaper, assembly, which is a meeting. Maheen, got it, okay? Write a book about it. If you really want to get your point across, and Navaya was pretty correct as well, you need to write about it, okay? And we saw this with the Declaration of Independence and common sense, correct? Many people were unsure about independence, so if you were unsure, you read common sense, and it kind of convinced you to get your point across there, okay? So now what we're going to do is, the Founding Fathers are going to say, okay, we're a part of the Federalists. So a lot of the Founding Fathers were a part of the Federalist group. They said, you know what, if it worked for common sense, this book, and convinced a lot of people, maybe we need to make clearer what our expectations of the Constitution will be so the people understand it. Because maybe some people aren't understanding it. And what they do is they got a situation. Yeah, I know a lot of people are having problems with the internet. It's okay, it's no problem. I know it's raining and stuff and a little windy. They're going to create a book. They're not going to call it a book. They're going to call it the Federalist Papers, which is our last slide here. Definitely write down all of it, but the first thing is the most important. Okay. So our Founding Fathers, specifically Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, they were the two biggest Federalists at the time. And for those that don't know this, James Madison was the father of the Constitution. He wrote most of the Constitution with the help of others, but he wrote down most of it. So obviously he's going to be for it. So after they wrote the Constitution, they were noticing a lot of people were getting things mixed up. So when they said they wanted a stronger national government, many of the people in the country took that as, oh my God, we're going to have another King George. So they wanted to make it clear and get to a large group of people, a large audience, what actually ratifying the Constitution and what the Constitution actually stands for. Because even right now, unless you remember some things from 7th grade, I haven't even told you what's in the Constitution yet, right? It's a long document. So if you were to sit down and read it, some things can be confusing. So the Federalist Papers are something where if you take AP US history or if you take a college course in American history, you will probably have to read through them. But like common sense, I'm going to kind of give you the overview of what the 90 or 95 essays will be about. About 95 essays or so that go through the major foundations of why our Constitution was written and why it will be an effective document. All right? So you might say, Mr. Panio, why are you taking the Federalist side as opposed to the Anti-Federalist side? Because ultimately, I think the Federalists win out. We have a Constitution that still exists in 2020, the same Constitution that was written and finished on September 17, 1787. So the Federalists obviously win the argument out, but they do take a lot of good ideas from the Anti-Federalists. What is amazing about the Founding Fathers that we really need to understand in this year, because we don't do a great job of it, is we never compromise. All right? A lot of these Founding Fathers found ways to compromise with their political opponents, and that is something we don't do as well in 2020. If you see the politics of today. Okay, if you're a young kid and you don't really see it, that's okay. As you get older, you'll start to see it. But you need to marvel at the fact that our Founding Fathers were really good at this early on. Okay, so what was it? It was a series of essays that encouraged, that supported, encouraged, and defended the ratification of the Constitution. All right, so it was trying to convince people to say, okay, your state should now vote on ratifying the Constitution, and this is why. Okay, and the essays went into detail. It's well written. It's very in deep and in thought, but it goes into all the reasons what the Founding Fathers and the Federalists wanted in the Constitution, and it starts making it a lot clearer. It also, and the second thing you're writing down, this is not something you'd see on your test in Unit 1, but it's something that you'll see going throughout the class in some of your further units. It establishes our country as what's known as a limited government. Okay? So it's the political theory behind the foundations of American government and are still referred to today by the courts. So what does limited government mean? Well, Britain had what's called a monarchy. That is an example of a full government. The government tells you what your rights are. The government tells you what you can do. The government tells you what's right and wrong. This would go for the same thing with the dictatorship when you learn about in Unit 5 and 6 World War II, right? We learn about dictatorships, okay, and Adolf Hitler. Those are full, absolute governments, okay? Our country and the Federalist Papers really go into details about how we are a limited government. And essentially in the Federalist Papers, it establishes government's supposed to do two things: protect you and protect your rights. And that's it. Okay. Now, have we moved away from that as a country in 2020? Yes. Government does a little bit more than that. But essentially, if you're realizing in your country, you are pretty much destined to live your own destiny. What that means is the government's not going to establish what job you're going to have. The government's not going to establish, what life you're going to live. That's up to you. Right? If you want to be, want to go to a really great college, if you want to have a particular job, if you want to not do that, that's all up to you. The government's not going to predetermine it for you. All right. So essentially, the government does not get involved in a lot of people's business, ladies and gentlemen. All right. The government is limited in its control. All right. So they really established that, yes, we want a stronger federal government, something stronger than the states. But we don't want to get involved in people's business. We don't want to get people involved in people's economy. Like a huge thing you'll notice on our country is the government stays out of the way our country makes money. They leave it up to the people to do that. All right. And there's some pros and cons to that, as you'll see, but this is how our country was established. And pretty much the Federalist Papers argues that people have the freedom to do what they want and the government's not going to get involved. This is a big difference from the Articles of Confederation. And it's a big difference than King George III. They want to find the happy medium. Okay? Any questions, please write them in the chat. Of course, Joshua, unless it's illegal. Of course. That's where you need to have, that's why the term limited government. We still have government, but if you're doing the right thing, then it shouldn't be much of a problem. All right, you have about 8 minutes left. I believe you honestly can finish, even though it's 12 questions, because it's such a short, easy assignment. The next document that I shared is going to be a copy of the Federalists, Anti-Federalists. You're going to use the pictures at the top. Okay, if you see what I'm sharing now, you're going to see the pictures at the top. All right, and then you're going to go into these questions. Questions 1 through 5, you're literally just going to write Federalists or Anti-Federalists. Okay, very simple, one-word answers, very straightforward. Number 6, you're going to go into the leaders. Just look at the chart, tell me who the leaders were of both sides. Okay, some of the major founding fathers. All right. Number 7 is an important question. I'm going to highlight it on mine because this is going to kick off what our lesson is going to be on tomorrow. Okay. And then eventually you got your practice Regents questions at the bottom. Okay, so work on those. Everything is literally in the charts. Yes, Milagros, it is just a quick check-in, but obviously the biggest thing is the Regents questions. Okay. So that's what I'm going to be checking tomorrow. So tomorrow when we go over this, you have 7 minutes and I'll be quiet. I got to take attendance really quick. I'm running behind here because of this COVID test. We copied the word and that too. Yeah, just Federalists or Anti-Federalists, and then you go from there. This is the first thing we're doing tomorrow, so make sure that you have this, even if you turn it in at the end, because we will go over all questions 7 through 11. Okay? Yep, just finish this up and you're all done. Any questions, please write in the chat as I get my attendance sheet. And again, please, no one leave until I take attendance fully and you're done. So let me get set up with that. Louise, you're doing right now the one that says Federalists and Anti-Federalists, not the one that says 3/5 compromise. That was the one we did at the beginning of class. No, all right, it's definitely one side. Originally, one side did not want it. The other side really wanted it. So put the side that really wanted it.